The title of this presentation is Delray Beach Greenhouse Gas Inventory and Climate Action Plan. And at the end of the presentation, we have a climate challenge also. So hope you stick around for that. So I like to start off with something that I think is really important. There still is a lot of controversy over climate change. And the data is complicated. It is extensive. I've been an environmental scientist for more than 30 years, and I have gone through a progression of looking at the data, reading reports, and making observations of my own. I remember diving in the Keys in 1984 when I was getting certified. And the coral that I saw was fabulous, and I wish that I had realized what the change was going to be in that coral, because the water temperatures changed tremendously over the coming decades. And so I want to give some points that really are not so data intensive. They do use information, but they're more of the common sense things that I really think indicates climate change is real. So the greenhouse effect was first in the scientific literature in 1856. That's not a typo. More than 150 years ago, Eunice Foote, a female scientist, did some simple but very eloquent experiments with glass containers that were sealed, different gases, with a thermometer. And the carbon dioxide filled container increased in temperature much more than air. That was the first description of the greenhouse effect. But there actually was even earlier scientific calculations where scientists were saying there's something in our atmosphere that is causing us to be warmer than we should be. So there was a recognition of that. This effect is clearly understood. It really is just a matter of exactly how it happens. Carbon dioxide, even at a very low level, and back in the 1700s and certainly in the 1850s, we were talking about less than 300 parts per million, which is a small amount, but it's really the effect. You may have read about PFAS, the forever compounds that are in water. Very, very low concentrations of PFAS has a very significant long-term health effect. So it is this change from 280 to 300 to now more than 50% higher concentration of CO2 in the environment. And really, in recent years where this concentration has gone up so much, we have also seen an increase in our temperatures. That is a correlation that's important. Other kinds of observations is that the world atmosphere, the world environment is connected. So the CO2 that's in the air doesn't just stay in the air. It also dissolves in water. And there has been a measurable change in pH. Now, pH is on a log scale. So don't let that 0.1, even though it is the whole ocean, so that's a lot of volume. Actually, that 0.1 log scale is about a 30% increase. And, I look at my bank account, if it was 30% higher, then, I would certainly think that was significant. The temperature has increased every year since 1977. If you look at a graph of average temperature over 150 years, then it's very stark. Since 1977, all of them are higher, and generally getting more above average every year. In fact, since 2010, we have 10 of the warmest years on record. So that's a very large percentage. And I used to live in the Keys, and this was on a presentation that I gave to the Key West Propeller Club. 0.8 of a foot of sea level rise in about 100 years. And 100 years ago, I don't think that there was any concern for any political agenda or anything. It was navigation. We needed to know what the elevation of the water was in order to get ships in and out that weren't under propulsion by a motor. And there are plenty of studies. NOAA has lots of different publications. This NASA publication has a lot of that information also. So I do believe that it's real, and so it's important for us, even though it's smart to be more efficient, we do need to take action. So this is a graph that comes out of the International Panel on Climate Change, 6th assessment report. It is kind of busy, but this black line is actual data of carbon emissions. So it is in the gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent. This is worldwide. You see that increase continuing, and then as more municipalities, governments, individuals are recognizing that carbon emissions are responsible for climate change, there is this change in our policies and our behaviors. But if we continue the way we are, then the increase in temperature is going to be 3.2 degrees Celsius with an error bar that's represented by the red. If we want to have a more manageable situation where sea level rise isn't extensive, the strength of storms and rain, which I'll talk about in a minute, then we need to reduce our carbon emissions, hopefully to at least limit warming to no more than 2 degrees Celsius, but really the recommendation is to limit warming to this 1.5 degrees C, and that's at about 2050. Okay, so this is a scientific graph that really is in support of policies that limit greenhouse gases. So what's caused by these emissions? And we've seen a lot of these things already. I read articles every day, and I read one on the predictions from the 1980s federal government, and a lot of them really are on target. So we have more days of extreme heat. I mean, this summer has been just unbearably hot, and Florida hasn't even gotten the worst of it. I remember over the July 4th weekend, I went outside and I said, and I do a lot of outdoor work on the weekends, and I said, it just feels warmer. In fact, it really, really was. Thinking about people that are outdoors for a living is really something of importance. The sea level rise, that is continuing. We're looking at more than a foot of increase over the next 50 to 100 years because the rate of sea level rise is increasing as the ice sheets and glaciers melt. Extreme rainfall events, and as I put these presentations together, I'm not even concerned anymore with the examples that I'm going to use. It seems like every week or two, there is something new that I can put on. So if you remember back in April of this year, the Florida International Airport had to shut down for a couple of days because it was completely flooded. The runways were flooded because of the extreme rainfall event. Also in California, just last month, the first tropical storm in 100 years hit California. We are seeing changes that we need to respond to. We're seeing more hurricanes of a major category, and again, I'm not concerned with finding examples because we just had one within a week that went from a category 1 to a 4 in about a day. That rapid intensification is unusual, but it's because of the extremely high water temperatures that fuel these storms. We know they fuel these storms. Ocean temperatures, again, I referenced diving in the Keys and the corals. We have the highest temperature ever recorded on the ocean side of the Keys, not in Florida Bay, on the ocean side at 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And corals just cannot exist. A coral system that's been there for thousands of years at least is now dying off at an incredible rate. And all of these things incorporate measurements that really aren't that hard for us to measure. They are very solid, These are just the direct effects. Ultimately, what happens is a disruption to our economy. I mean, look at agriculture, where temperature changes occur. Buds will come out on a lot of agricultural crops early because of the warming and the shorter winters, but you may get a cold snap that then kills. People that are working outdoors, as I mentioned, it is harder on them. It is a health issue. So they may not be able to work as efficiently. There can be more safety concerns. There are some real important indirect effects, and some countries, especially island countries, climate change and sea level rise there is no question with them. They are looking at losing all of the exposed land in their country. Those and other shoreline communities that are exposed to strong storms that don't have the same resources at a place like the United States, people won't have much choice but to try to go to somewhere else, or they won't continue to exist. So immigration will be even more exacerbated. And in places like Africa, where droughts occur, people have had to move. This is very much an issue that in indirect ways affects us, and has really humanitarian components to it too. So, with that as the background, climate change is important, limiting greenhouse gases is important. What is the first step in that process? Doing a greenhouse gas inventory. So we did another inventory and using 2019 data. This was published last year. We worked with the assistance of ICLEI, which is an international consortium of local environmental agencies. They guided us through really a very technical process in gathering our emissions data. So this is a very busy slide. This is actually one of the tables that comes out of the report. There's a simplified one coming up in just a minute. But I wanted to impress upon you that we got data from FPL on different ways that electricity is used, because it's important that we understand the sources as we move forward on how do we reduce our emissions. We got natural gas information. We got from ICLEI, used a Google model on transportation. So how many transportation miles links to how much emissions are generated. We went to the Solid Waste Authority and got information on their waste to energy plant, and also there are some emissions that come even though it's mostly ash in the landfill. So that methane coming out, we got information. We went to our own utilities for water and wastewater plants, including the sludge that comes out of the plant, and we have those numbers. And then this is not quite as high a quality data as from the other sections, but some of the natural gas generation to come up with ultimately 550 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents being generated. So this is a much easier slide too, but it takes the same data and it shows mainly it's transportation, and then our residential and commercial buildings. More than 95% of our carbon emissions in Delray Beach are coming from transportation and our buildings. So that's very clear. If we're going to be looking at means of reducing our greenhouse gases, especially meeting a goal of 50% in 7 years from now, we have to look at transportation. We have to look at our buildings. And we have a link in the presentation which will be posted on our website that takes you to the full inventory report. Okay, so the end of the inventory report has this goal that I have referred to, and this is something that is put out by the Race to Zero initiative. The United Nations and many climate scientists believe that we have got to set goals of at least 50% reduction in our emissions by 2030 and net zero emissions by 2050. And to me, that just is not very far off, and many cities and organizations are not on track to be hitting these goals. The problem with that, if we don't reduce our greenhouse emissions, then we're going to continue to see the climate change effects that I mentioned earlier, and they can even get stronger with more disruption, making it more difficult for us to continue our lives. So what kinds of things can we do? You know, we talked a bit about buildings and some of the strategies there, renewable energy. And there's going to be different renewable energy strategies in different parts of the world and in our country. For here in South Florida, solar is a great option. There are incentives associated with that. Not every building is going to be a good place to install solar on, but there are a lot of them. On my home, I put in solar. And it was a real learning process for me, but it is working well for me. Really, all of our new buildings, as we design them, we need to come at them from the outset with a net zero in mind. And this ties in with the city's green building ordinance also. We may not just hit a silver certification level, but if we're going to a net zero, we can reach a higher level of certification also. New buildings really are the easiest way to design in renewable energy. When you go to retrofitting, there's just an existing structure there that you have to deal with. A different set of tools you may be able to use, such as more efficiency. So in an existing structure, you can put in insulation, and that will save emissions, save energy, saves money also. So there are a lot of different strategies that can go in to how we make our buildings more efficient and reduce emissions. Transportation, there are different strategies. Again, some of them here really need to take a look at, well, what am I driving? Okay. Electric vehicles are a good option, but you have to have a place to charge it, either at your home or a place that's on your typical paths that you drive. So it may not be that an electric vehicle is something that works for everybody. Well, there are other options. Hybrid vehicle, and actually hybrid vehicles are more what we're talking about in the city of Delray Beach fleet, because it's going to be hard for us and lots of other large organizations to make that change to completely move to electric vehicles. So you have to do an assessment of your fleet, how it's used, what is available in the marketplace that meets those needs. Is it a large construction vehicle? Is it a small vehicle that's used by an education coordinator or a sustainability officer? We need to look at those fleets, get the right vehicle and the most efficient vehicle that we can, and those same kinds of considerations are for individual families and homes. An EV charger plan, again, for a home or on a larger organization, how do we put those in? There's permitting that's required. There's electrical needs from the grid. So it's going to take us a good bit of planning to address these. Some of the easier things to consider is just, where am I going? Can I go to a grocery store that's closer to my home if it meets my needs? Can we use virtual meetings rather than everybody driving to a location? And there certainly is a balance there. It's good for people to get together and have the face-to-face, but when we look at greenhouse gases, we have a way of reducing the number of miles that we're driving. And then other kinds of alternatives. We have a freebie for the downtown area in Delray, where we have an app. You call, there is a large low-speed vehicle, like a golf cart, but it's street legal, that can come pick you up. And there's other commercial entities like Ubers and Lyft and others. So those kinds of opportunities, making the city so that we have shade. So our tree planting effort can actually encourage less use of vehicles, because if you have a nice open area and it's cool enough, and there's a big difference between bicycling through shade and bicycling on a hot black pavement for miles. So also shuttles that are rapid transit, but smaller, that fit on our roads. So, and there's a lot more kinds of strategies that can go into it, but we're going to have to look at all of these kinds of solutions if we're going to make our emission reduction goals. So, our inventory feeds into reduction of greenhouse gases, but this reduction for buildings and transportation is just a part of a larger climate action plan. We do need to reduce our emissions because that's what's feeding into climate change, but some of the impacts of climate change we're not going to be able to avoid. So while we are looking at our renewable energy and our efficiency, we also need to look at water conservation, for example, because as sea level rises, there's actually more of a push for sea level to intrude towards our wells that give us our drinking water. In addition to that, water is heavy. So it takes quite a bit of energy to pump it out of the ground, pump it to the treatment plant, and then run the treatment plant and pump it out of the plant to everybody's faucet. So there are a lot of opportunities for us to conserve the resource of water, but also to conserve energy. Our waste generation, just using less. And this morning, we had a presentation from the Solid Waste Authority. You can take a look at that online on our YouTube channel. But generating less waste, buying products that have less of that extra packaging, buying products that have packaging that is recyclable. So our waste management is very important. And then use of our natural environment. Presentation that George Gann gave a little bit ago. Our habitat restoration provides plants and animals that really allow the natural environment to function, and they can have, the environment has a protective benefit. So the dune that Delray has, which is really in much better shape than a lot of other cities, provides tremendous amount of protection from strong storms. And that is a natural system. It's not going to survive in as good a shape without having plants and animals that are adapted to that system. Also, in other areas, mangroves are a great opportunity to have a living, growing feature that will resist erosion, but also block storm surge. So rather than a concrete system that is going to break down and can be topped, you can have a living system. So using our natural environment is really better to address climate change, and it gives us a better, more healthy place to live. The built environment, and actually I should say, these 6 categories generally you will see in climate action plans from neighboring cities and counties and other places around the country. So a lot of the earlier talk on the greenhouse gas inventory, it is a portion of this, but these sections also are part of the larger climate action plan. And I'm going to be making a presentation to the City Commission on September 18th, very similar to this. And hopefully the city of Delray Beach will move forward on a climate action plan. And that concludes this part of the presentation. I'll be happy to take questions.